The man who painted this masterpiece was thrown out of the most prestigious art school in America for refusing to stop painting and drawing men in the nude. What he did next is one of the most extraordinary acts of defiance in the history of American art. A boxer leans back in the corner of a ring, bare-chested, his arms clinging to the ropes. His lean, pale body glows under the arena light, the brightest thing in the room. A man fans him vigorously with a white towel. Another leans in from behind, checking for damage. A police officer stands motionless in the far left shadow. The crowd is a dark sea of faces above, and the painter who made this, who rendered every tendon, every shadow on the boxer's ribs, every muscle slack with exhaustion, was a man obsessed with getting the male body right. This masterpiece painting is called Between Rounds, and it was painted in 1899 by Thomas Eakins. The boxer's name was Billy Smith, and he lost more fights than he won. And the bond between these two men, the painter and the fighter, lasted nearly 20 years, ending in one of the most quietly devastating and touching scenes in the history of American art. Thomas Eakins was the most uncompromising realist in American painting. He studied anatomy at Jefferson Medical College alongside surgeons, watching dissections of cadavers so he could render the human body with absolute precision. He believed the naked figure was the foundation of all great art, and he insisted his students draw from fully nude models, male and female, in every class. In 1886, that conviction destroyed him. As director of the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts, Eakins removed a male model's loincloth in class where female students were present. The Academy forced him to resign. No public explanation was given. Philadelphia society turned its back. He became an outcast in his own city. He would gift portraits to sitters, and they would destroy them. Critics called his work ugly, depressing, and too honest. For a decade, he painted mostly portraits, dark, brooding studies of people who looked like they carried the weight of the world. Walt Whitman, who lived across the river in Camden, New Jersey, became a close friend. He said, "I never knew but one artist who could resist the temptation to see what they think ought to be rather than what is." He was talking about Thomas Eakins. And then, in 1898, Eakins walked into a boxing arena and found a world where the male body was not only acceptable, but celebrated. The Philadelphia arena sat on the corner of Broad and Cherry Streets, diagonally across from the very academy that had expelled him. Eakins began attending professional fights there in 1898, accompanied by friends and students. What he found was a revelation to him. The boxing world of 1890s Philadelphia was part of what historians call sporting culture, a working-class underworld where prize fighting, gambling, and sex work all intersected. It was a place where men's bodies were on open display, where physical contact between men was expected, and where the rigid boundaries of respectable society didn't apply. Prize fighters depended on wealthy patrons who paid their training costs. They covered their expenses, and they often maintained close personal relationships with them. The boundaries between sponsorship, companionship, and intimacy in this world were not always clear, and not always meant to be. For an artist who had been expelled from polite Philadelphia for insisting on the naked male form, it must have felt like coming home. Eakins befriended several fighters and asked them to pose for him. With the help of sports writers who made introductions, he turned his studio into a place where boxers sparred, posed, and lounged. One fighter, Elwood McCloskey, would round up fellow pugilists who had skipped their posing sessions, shouting, "Haven't you got a date to pose for Mr. Eakins?" Among those fighters was a featherweight from South Philly named Billy Smith. His nickname was Turkey Point. He won roughly 20% of his fights, He wasn't a champion. He wasn't famous. But Eakins saw something in him. Between Rounds is one of 3 large boxing canvases Eakins produced in this period, and it's the finest. It depicts Billy Smith seated in his corner during a pause in a fight, attended by his seconds, they're called, while the timekeeper marks the interval and the crowd surges in the background. Every person in this painting is real. Susan McDowell Eakins, the artist's wife, later confirmed, "Every person in the picture posed for him. Eakins placed his own father, Benjamin, in the stands. His protege, the sculptor Samuel Murray, who was likely the most important relationship of Eakins' later life, a bond scholars widely believe was romantic, he's visible in the crowd too." Sports writer Clarence Cranmer, who had opened the door to the boxing world for Eakins, is also there. The painting is a portrait of a community disguised as a sporting event. But the center of it all is Billy Smith, Turkey Point. Eakins renders him with the same anatomical precision he learned studying cadavers. The lean muscles, the pale skin gone grayish yellow under indoor light, the arms draped over the ropes to open his chest. He's the brightest point in the dark. In this hazy composition, every other figure recedes into shadow, while Smith's bare flesh catches all the light and all the eyes. And notice who's watching him. The timekeeper watches for efficiency. The press gallery watches for a story. The crowd watches for excitement, and the policeman, standing rigid in the shadows, his dark uniform a stark contrast to Smith's near nakedness, he watches for transgression. Eakins has painted a masterful scene where the male body is the object of every gaze in the room, and for different reasons, and he painted it with a tenderness that goes far beyond clinical observation. In the companion painting, Salutat, which depicts the same fight, Smith lost. He was knocked out in the final round, but Eakins painted him as the winner. Arm raised, saluting the crowd like a Roman gladiator. He gave the man who lost more than he won a moment of triumph that the real world never did. And that would be repaid. I'll explain that in a minute. A quick pause. If this painting moves you, you can buy a high-quality canvas directly from my website. Rich tone, true color, hundreds of masterpieces like this to turn your home into your own personal museum. Every order ships free, and every purchase keeps these videos coming. Link is right below in the description. Now, let me tell you what happened next in the story, because this is where it all breaks open. After posing for the paintings Between Rounds and Salutat, Billy Smith didn't disappear from Eakins' life. He became a companion and a comfort to the artist. Their bond deepened over nearly 2 decades, the famous painter and the journeyman boxer, an unlikely friendship that outlasted almost every other relationship in Eakins' life. In later years, Eakins' health deteriorated badly. He grew frail, his legs failed him, he couldn't move around his own house, and it was Billy Smith, the fighter, the man who'd been painted bare and vulnerable himself in a boxing ring, who came back and cared for him. Smith gave the aging artist therapeutic massages. When Eakins could no longer walk, Smith physically carried him from room to room, the same way Eakins had carried him aloft to victory in the Salutat. Think about that reversal. In 1899, Eakins had all the power, the education, reputation, and the brush. Smith was the one who was bare, exposed, and dependent on the painter's eye to be seen at all. But by 1916, the roles had completely reversed, and Eakins was the vulnerable one, and the boxer held him. Billy Smith kept the portrait study that Eakins had given him, a smaller version of the Between Rounds painting, for the rest of his life. When he was asked years later to comment about Eakins and what the painting was all about, Smith simply wrote, "It was 1898 when Mr. Eakins came to a boxing club to get a model for his first fight picture." He didn't need to say more. The painting said everything. Thomas Eakins died on June 25, 1916. He was 71 years old, and he's buried at the Woodland Cemetery in Philadelphia. Today, the painting Between Rounds hangs in the Philadelphia Museum of Art, in the same city that shunned him, and across the river from where his friend Walt Whitman lived, a few blocks from the academy that fired him. The painting is considered one of the masterpieces of American realism, and Billy Smith, the featherweight who lost most of his fights, became, through Eakins' brush, one of the most enduring figures in American art. What strikes me the most is what this painting is really about. It's not about boxing. It's about what happens between the rounds, in the pauses and the silences, in those moments when the fighting stops and all that's left is a human body, exhausted and exposed, being tended by someone who cares. That is what Eakins saw in the arena. Not violence or spectacle, just that tenderness. And maybe that's why, decades later, when the painter could no longer stand on his own two legs, the boxer returned the favor. Do you see any details in this masterpiece painting that I might have missed? And who in your life has seen you between rounds? Let me know in the comment section below. Thank you for watching all the way to the end of this video, and I hope to see you in the next one. Check out all of my videos this month. I'm doing a 4-part series on the male body in art.